The paper bags cut into the crook of my elbows as I stepped through the front door, the weight of canned goods and milk making my arms tremble. The air inside felt too still, like the house had been holding its breath while I was gone. Mara stood in the middle of the living room. She wasn't scrolling her phone or folding laundry, or calling out a distracted hello the way she usually did. She was waiting. The afternoon light slanted across her face, highlighting the sharpness of her expression as if the sun itself refused to soften her. "Mom," she said, her voice flat practiced, "I'm tired of seeing you." She didn't stop there. And so is Evan. The words hit harder than the groceries slipping from my grip and thudding against the floor. A jar rolled across the carpet, bumping the leg of the coffee table. My pulse rushed to my ears. I stared at her, expecting a smirk, a shake of the head, something to tell me I had misheard. But her eyes didn't waver. They were steady cold, as if she had rehearsed this speech in her mind 100 times before saying it aloud. "What did you just say?" My voice cracked too thin like an old hinge. "You heard me." Mara crossed her arms. "Evan and I need space. Privacy. You're always here, always watching. It's suffocating. We're adults. We deserve to live our own life without you hanging over us." I tightened my grip on the bags, still dangling from one hand. My skin burned where the plastic dug in, but I wouldn't let myself flinch. "This is my house," I said, each word measured. "I bought it with my money, paid in full. The deed is in my name." Her lips curved into something between a frown and a smirk. "About that," she murmured. "We already used the house as collateral." The room tilted. What Mara shifted, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. "For the business loan. Evan's idea, but I agreed. It was the only way the bank would approve us. You should be grateful we're building something for the future. For family." Her words clanged in my chest like metal against stone. "You forged something," I whispered. "Because I never signed over this house. My signature isn't on any loan papers." She shrugged as if it were a detail too small to bother with. "It's done. You can't change it now." The plastic bags finally slipped from my arm. Oranges spilled, rolling in uneven circles across the hardwood floor. I bent to pick them up, more to steady myself than to save the fruit, but my hands shook. I looked at my daughter, the child I had carried, the girl whose hair I once braided before school, the young woman I once hugged tight when she brought Evan home for the first time and she was a stranger who could stand in the house I had purchased and speak to me like I was excess baggage. Mara didn't flinch. She only added, "Mom, please don't make this harder. We just need you to understand it's time for you to move out." Her voice was calm, final, like a judge delivering a sentence. I forced myself to straighten, to draw in air, though my chest was clamped shut. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood among the scattered groceries, my palms empty, and I thought of the deed tucked away in my desk drawer upstairs. The paper that carried my name, unforged, unchallenged, real. And as Mara turned away, already dialing Evan to tell him she'd finally said it, a sharper thought cut through the fog of my disbelief. If they had already gambled with my house, what else had they done behind my back? After Mara left me standing among the scattered oranges, I gathered them slowly, one by one, setting them back into the torn bag. The silence in the house was so heavy it pressed against my ribs. I walked the groceries into the kitchen, lined them on the counter, and let my hand rest on the edge of the sink. The metal felt cool against my palm, a small anchor. My eyes drifted toward the drawer upstairs where I kept the deed, and beside it, a ring of keys. The image of those keys pulled me back years ago, to a spring morning when this house was not yet filled with disappointment, but with hope. I remembered standing in the driveway, sun bright overhead, holding the keys in my hand. Mara was younger, then barely married, her eyes wide with gratitude. I had just signed the last papers, the ink still drying when I handed her the set. "You'll always have a home here," I told her. My voice had carried all the certainty of a promise I thought could never be broken. Her fingers closed around the keys, and her smile lit up the whole yard. Evan was there too, hovering already, talking about where the grill should go, what color to paint the shutters. But I saw only her face, saw in it the little girl who once built forts out of blankets and begged me to read just one more bedtime story. That moment had felt like a reward for years of scrimping, for decades of shelving books at the library, balancing bills, skipping vacations. Buying the house outright was more than shelter. It was proof that I could give my daughter a start I never had. Now, standing in the dim kitchen, the memory stung like salt in a wound. The keys in my desk drawer no longer looked like a gift. They looked like shackles binding me to a promise she had twisted into entitlement. I closed my eyes and could almost feel the weight of that ring in my palm. Back then, it had felt light, joyful, like possibility itself. Today, it felt heavier than the bags of groceries I carried through the door, heavier than the silence Mara left behind. I thought of the countless mornings I woke early to make coffee, to fold laundry, to keep this house humming, so she and Evan could focus on their work, their child, their life. I thought of the times I stepped aside, choosing the smallest bedroom for myself, telling them it was temporary. Somehow, temporary had become permanent, and generosity had become expectation. When had my gift turned into their claim? The answer was somewhere between the day I placed those keys in her hand and the afternoon she looked at me like an intruder. It was a line I never saw them cross until it was too late. I dried my hands with a towel and walked upstairs to my room. I opened the drawer and took out the keys. They glinted faintly in the light seeping through the blinds. I turned them over in my hand, listening to the faint metallic clink. Once that sound had meant safety. Now it echoed like a warning bell. I slipped them back into the drawer, careful, deliberate, as though setting down a weight I was not yet ready to carry. But I knew I would have to carry it soon. I could no longer ignore the truth that what was meant as shelter had been recast as ownership, as leverage, as debt. And as I closed the drawer, I wondered, can a promise of shelter survive when it's twisted into entitlement? The next few days passed with a heaviness I couldn't shake. I moved through the house like a guest overstaying her welcome, though every wall and window bore my name on the deed. Mara and Evan didn't need to shout anymore. Their silence did the work. At dinner, I set the table the way I always had, forks on the left, knives on the right, napkins folded neatly, but no one noticed. They sat across from me, absorbed in their screens, scrolling between bites. Conversation passed back and forth above my plate, as though I weren't there. When I did speak, mentioning something as harmless as the neighbor's new garden, no one responded. The words dissolved in the air before they reached anyone's ears. Later, when Sophie needed her homework checked, Mara left the folder on my chair without asking, without even looking at me. It was understood I would do it. I guided Sophie, patiently correcting her math problems, cheering her when she got them right. Yet when Mara reappeared, she didn't thank me. She only said, "Good, now we can all relax," as if I were a paid sitter who'd finished her shift. Each slight was small, but together they pressed on me like stones piling higher and higher. I could feel myself shrinking, edges worn down, until the woman who had bought this house began to vanish inside it. One afternoon, I passed through the living room where Evan sprawled on the couch with his laptop. He didn't look up as he said casually, "Your mom is always underfoot." I stopped in the doorway. He said it not to me, but to Mara, who was perched beside him. They both laughed softly, not cruelly, not loudly, but enough. Enough that my cheeks burned. I turned away, retreating upstairs before they could see the tears pressing against my eyes. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the quilt I had sewn years ago. I traced the stitches with my fingers, grounding myself in the work of my own hands. I told myself that silence was better than confrontation, that peace was worth swallowing pride. But the truth was heavier. I had become a shadow, tolerated only because I was useful. At night, I lay awake, listening to the house breathe, to the muffled laughter drifting from the living room, to the footsteps on the stairs that skipped the part of the hall where my door stood closed. They lived around me, not with me. I was here, but not included. Present, but not seen. It was the invisibility that cut deepest. To be ignored after giving everything to be treated as though my presence were clutter in the room was a wound I hadn't anticipated. Gifts had become obligations. Love had become labor. And my own child had turned my generosity into a reason to resent me. I rose and opened the window, letting in the night air. The cool breeze carried the faint scent of cut grass, a reminder that beyond these walls life went on untouched by the suffocating silence inside. Somewhere out there were people who spoke kindly, who looked others in the eye, who didn't erase with a shrug what had taken a lifetime to build. I leaned against the sill, feeling the wind on my face, and knew the question I had been avoiding was pressing closer. How long before silence turns into erasure? The confrontation happened on an ordinary Wednesday evening, though nothing about it felt ordinary to me. I had just set my cup of tea down when Mara stepped into the kitchen, her arms folded tight across her chest. Evan lingered a few steps behind his presence like a shadow propping her up. "Mom," Mara began, her voice clipped. "We've been talking. This isn't working anymore. You should find another place to live." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Evan cleared his throat, adding, "It's not personal. We just need privacy space for our own family. You've been here long enough." I looked at the two of them standing together shoulder to shoulder like a united front. My hands stayed flat against the counterpalms, pressing the cool surface as though it might steady me. My heart beat hard, but I forced my breaths to come slowly, evenly. Inside me, emotions roared. Anger for being pushed out of a home I had bought. Hurt that my daughter spoke as if I were a tenant overstaying a lease. Fear too, because I knew once I left they would try to close the door behind me forever. I expected myself to cry, to argue, to remind them whose name was etched on the deed. But instead, a calm rose up from somewhere deep, surprising even me. I exhaled, lifted my eyes to meet Mara's, and said just one word. "Okay." The silence afterward was louder than any argument could have been. Mara blinked, her lips parting as if she had prepared for protest, not agreement. Evan shifted uneasily, adjusting his stance, like he wasn't sure if the ground beneath him was still solid. They had expected rage. They had expected pleading. What they hadn't expected was surrender. That didn't sound like surrender at all. I picked up my tea again, sipping slowly, letting the warmth calm my throat. My daughter's eyes narrowed, unsettled. "That's it?" she asked. "That's all you're going to say?" "That's all," I replied. Her arms tightened across her chest, the silence stretching between us. Evan coughed once and muttered, Good then. That's settled. But it wasn't settled not for me. That okay wasn't a retreat. It was a promise to myself. A word spoken not in defeat, but in decision. I wouldn't fight them in this kitchen. I wouldn't beg for space in a house that had become colder with each passing day. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, and placed it carefully in the rack. My movements were quiet, deliberate, each one making Mara more restless. Her foot tapped against the tile. Her voice came sharper. I didn't mean right away. We'll figure out the details. Don't act like you don't care. I looked at her one last time, my daughter who no longer recognized the weight of the sacrifices that had built her foundation. My calm unsettled her, because it carried no argument, no crack for her to wedge control into. Then I walked past them, leaving the kitchen behind my steps, steady as I climbed the stairs. In my room, I closed the door, leaned against it, and felt the wood cool against my back. For the first time in years, the silence around me belonged to me. That night, lying awake, I understood something had shifted. Not in the house, not even in Mara or Evan, but inside myself. One word had changed the air. One word had reminded me that I still held the power to choose what came next. And I couldn't help but wonder what power lies in a single word spoken without fear. The morning after my quiet okay, the house was filled with a strange unease. Mara avoided my eyes as she packed Sophie's lunch, and Evan whistled off-key while tying his tie, the sound hollow in the kitchen. I moved through the rooms, silently gathering my purse and slipping out the front door before the heaviness of their presence could smother me. The bus terminal cafe sat on the corner of Main and Willow, a place I had known for years. It smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon sugar, a comfort I hadn't realized I craved until I stepped inside. Clara was already there, sitting by the window with her hair pinned back, a scarf looped neatly around her neck. She waved when she saw me, her smile warm and familiar. I sat across from her, the steam from my coffee curling between us. For a while, we didn't talk. Clara had always known how to give silence time to settle before asking questions. Finally, she leaned forward, her hands wrapping around her mug. "You look tired, Lorraine. What happened?" The words poured out of me, heavier than I'd intended. I told her about Mara's cold announcement, about Evan's careless laughter, about the invisible weight of being treated like an unwelcome guest in my own home. My voice cracked when I repeated Mara's exact words. "I'm tired of seeing you, and so is Evan." Clara's eyes sharpened her expression, turning from sympathy to something closer to outrage. She said that, "To you," I nodded, as if I were some stranger renting the spare room. She shook her head, setting her cup down with a thud. "If they treat you like an intruder, maybe it's time you remind them whose name is on the deed." Her words landed squarely in my chest. I had been carrying that deed in silence, like a forgotten shield tucked in a drawer. I had thought of it as a document, nothing more. But Clara's tone reminded me it was more than paper. It was proof of my worth, of the sacrifices I had made, of the life I had built with my own 2 hands. I traced the rim of my coffee cup. "You think I should fight them?" Fight? Clara gave a dry laugh. "No, that gives them power. You don't fight children who behave badly. You set boundaries. You decide what you'll allow and what you won't." The word boundaries clung to me. I had set so few with Mara, always choosing peace over confrontation, always telling myself patience was the higher virtue. Now that patience had turned me into a doormat. Clara leaned in closer. "Lorraine, you paid for that house in full. It's yours. You don't owe them anything. If they want space, give it to them, but not on your expense, on theirs." I let out a breath, staring out the cafe window, at buses pulling in and out, at travelers stepping off with suitcases ready to start fresh in new places. The thought brushed me with a strange exhilaration. I could start fresh too. I could walk away, not empty-handed, but with everything that belonged to me. I turned back to Clara. If I did, if I reminded them whose house it really is, what would that look like? Her smile was slow, deliberate, almost conspiratorial. It would look like selling. Selling quietly, on your terms. Imagine the look on their faces when they walk in and realize the roof over their heads no longer belongs to them. A shiver ran through me, not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I felt the ground shift back beneath my feet. I sipped the last of my coffee and nodded, letting her words sink deep. Am I ready to reclaim what I gave away so freely? Clara wasted no time. That very evening, she scribbled a name and number on the back of a cafe receipt, sliding it across the table like a secret. He's discreet. Trustworthy. Helped me when I sold my sister's condo after she passed. The next morning, I called. A calm voice answered, introducing himself as Donovan Jimenez. He agreed to meet me the same day, no delays, no fuss. The speed of it made my pulse quicken. His office was tucked on the second floor of a modest brick building downtown, above a tailor shop and beside an old law office. Inside, the light was warm and low, a brass lamp on his desk glowing against the wood paneling. It felt less like a business office and more like someone's study, quiet safe. He rose when I entered, offering a firm handshake and kind eyes. Mrs. Hale, thank you for coming. Please sit. I sank into the leather chair, clutching my bag as though it carried my spine. I'll be honest, I said. This isn't easy for me. No sale, he replied, folding his hands neatly on the desk. But if you're here, it's because you've already made the decision. My role is to make it efficient, clean, and most importantly, private. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That's exactly what I need. He pulled a folder toward him. Clara mentioned your situation. Before we go further, I need to confirm one thing. Do you hold full ownership of the property? I opened my bag and drew out the deed worn at the edges from years of safekeeping. Placing it on the desk felt like laying down a weapon I had hidden too long. Mr. Jimenez adjusted his glasses and studied it carefully. He tapped his pen against the line where my name was written. Clear and uncontested. Lorraine Hale, sole owner. Paid in full, no liens, no debts. He looked up. It's entirely yours. The confirmation hit me with a rush of vindication and sorrow all at once. My house. Mine. And yet I had allowed myself to live inside it as though I were borrowing space. I'll be blunt, Mr. Jimenez continued. This is one of the cleaner situations I've seen. If you wish, I can have a private listing ready by tomorrow. Given the market and with a few cash buyers, I know personally we could close within a week. The word week echoed in my mind. 7 days. After years of biting my tongue, of shrinking myself small, everything could change in a span of days. A week, I repeated. He nodded. Discreetly, of course. We wouldn't post public listings. I handle select clients who prefer transactions under the radar. No for sale sign, no chatter, just documents, signatures, and transfer. I pressed my hands together, the tremor in them betraying me. And if someone tries to interfere, my daughter, her husband, they might attempt something. Mr. Jimenez leaned back slightly, studying me. Mrs. Hale, they can shout, they can object, they can even throw lawyers into the wind. But this house is yours. You have the deed, the authority, and the right. As long as you sign, no one can undo it. His certainty steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. For the first time in months, I felt less like prey and more like a woman holding her own reins. We spent another half hour going over forms, possibilities, and logistics. I signed nothing, yet only listened, but when I stood to leave, I carried more than papers. I carried a new resolve. As I stepped out into the dusky evening, the streetlights flickering to life, I thought of Mara and Evan, sitting comfortably in a house they assumed would always be theirs. If I moved quickly, could I outpace their schemes? That night, after leaving Mr. Jimenez's office, I sat at my desk with a yellow legal pad and a red pen. The lamp cast a pool of light across the paper, and in the quiet of my room, I began to write. I listed every item in the house that I had bought with my own money. Not gifts from Mara and Evan, not shared purchases mine. Line after line, I wrote Italian leather sofa, 2012 receipt, filed in folder 3. Set of Japanese knives. 2018, bought on sale at the kitchen store in town. Dining table oak refinished by hand before moving in. Dishwasher installed last spring. Each word anchored me. I could see the years stacked behind them. The paychecks stretched, the long hours at the library, the careful saving. Nothing had fallen into my lap. Every piece had been earned, chosen, carried into this house by me. When the page filled, I took the red pen and drew check marks beside each item. The sound of ink scratching across the paper was sharp, almost defiant. With every check, I felt myself reclaiming ground I had let slip away. I moved through the house quietly, notebook in hand, writing more as I went. The rug in the entryway mine. The china set used only on holidays mine. The quilt folded on the couch, every stitch sewn by my fingers mine. In the kitchen, I paused before the gleaming dishwasher. I remembered how Mara had laughed when I insisted on paying for it myself. "You don't need to," she had said then. "We'll cover it." But I had pressed my card into the clerk's hand, refusing. Now, seeing it on my list, I felt relief. If I hadn't, it would have been another chain for them to claim. The list grew longer. Jewelry tucked away in boxes. Artwork collected at community fairs. Even the heavy curtains in the living room that I had sewn myself. I wrote until my wrist ached, until the pages were covered in neat lines and crimson checks. By the time I set the pen down, I felt lighter. For weeks I had been shrinking under the weight of being unwanted. Tonight, I reminded myself that I was not invisible. The proof was everywhere, in wood and fabric, in porcelain and steel. The house was full of my fingerprints, my labor, my care. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on its cover. Tomorrow, I would start boxing the items marked for storage. Clara had already offered the use of her spare garage, and Mr. Jimenez knew a storage company he trusted. Step by step, I would peel back what was mine from the walls they had assumed belonged only to them. I rose, carrying the notebook to the nightstand, and looked once more around the room. The dresser by the wall, the lamp on the table, even the quilt draped over the chair. Each one had a story, a price paid, a reason to claim. As I switched off the light, a new thought pressed against me. What else must I mark as mine before they strip it away? The morning light had barely reached the blinds when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it, expecting maybe a reminder from the pharmacy or a note from Clara. Instead, the screen lit up with a message from Mara. "Can you watch Sophie after school? Evan and I both have late meetings." In the past, I would have typed, of course, without hesitation, rearranging whatever plans I had so they could work uninterrupted. I would have brewed tea, set out snacks, and filled the hours with homework help and bedtime stories until they returned. That had become my silent contract, always available, always useful. But last night's ledger still sat on my desk, pages filled with red checks that reminded me what was mine. I stared at Mara's text, the cursor blinking in the reply box. My thumb hovered for a long moment before I typed 2 words. No, I'm busy. I pressed send before I could lose my nerve. The message left me breathless, as if I had stepped off a ledge. The dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Mara's reply came. Busy with what I didn't answer. I placed the phone face down on the table, my pulse loud in my ears. My plans didn't matter. What mattered was that I had said no. For the first time in years, I had refused. That afternoon, I moved through the house with a different weight in my step. When the front door opened and Sophie bounded in from school, Mara right behind her, I greeted my granddaughter warmly, but stayed clear of the usual routine. Mara's eyes flicked toward me sharp. We managed, she said tightly. I'm glad, I replied, my tone even. The evening passed under a brittle silence. At dinner, Sophie chatted about a science project, her words filling the gaps Mara refused to bridge. Evan shoveled food onto his plate, pretending not to notice the tension. But when Sophie went upstairs, he leaned back in his chair and gave a low chuckle. She's finally losing it, he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. I folded my napkin, carefully smoothing the creases. Or maybe I'm just finding it, I said softly. He blinked at me, caught off guard, then snorted, as if to dismiss it. Mara didn't laugh. She pushed her plate away and stood mumbling something about laundry before leaving the room. Alone with Evan, I felt the weight of his stare. You've been acting strange, he said. Strange, I tilted my head. For wanting my own time? His smirk faltered. You're always here. You've always been here. It's unsettling when you change. I met his gaze until he looked away. Then I rose, gathered my plate, and placed it in the sink. My hands didn't tremble. Upstairs, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook again. The red checks stared back at me, steady and unflinching. Saying no to babysitting might have seemed small, but it was a crack in the wall they had built around me. A crack that let light in. I closed the book and set my pen across it, my shoulders loosening as I exhaled. They didn't yet understand what my silence meant, but I did. Will they see my silence as surrender or as warning? 2 days after my firm refusal, the phone rang just after breakfast. I almost ignored it, thinking it might be another telemarketer. But when I saw the caller ID Herrick and Associates, I answered. Mrs. Hale came, the steady baritone of my attorney, Mr. Herrick. I'm afraid we have a situation. The air tightened in my lungs. What kind of situation? A bank in town reached out to me, he said. They flagged a power of attorney document in your name. According to this paperwork, you authorized your daughter and son-in-law to use your property as collateral for a business loan. My hand clenched around the receiver. That's impossible. I never signed anything like that. I suspected as much. The signature, it's convincing, but I've seen your real one often enough to notice the differences. Still, to protect you, I'll need you to provide a fresh, notarized signature for comparison. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the wood grain swimming before my eyes. Mara's voice from that first confrontation echoed in my head. We already used the house as collateral. I had dismissed it as arrogance, exaggeration. But no, it was deliberate. They had gone so far as to forge me into silence. I'll do it. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Tell me what you need. Herrick explained the steps. By noon, I was at the notary's office downtown, pressing pen to paper with deliberate care, my strokes firm, no hesitation. The notary stamped the page with a heavy seal, the sound like a gavel hitting wood. Later, I faxed and emailed the documents to Herrick. Within hours, he called back satisfaction, threading his usually formal tone. The bank has accepted your statement and the notarized comparison. The attempted loan has been blocked. Legally, your daughter and her husband have no standing to use your property without your explicit consent. Relief rippled through me, but beneath it was something darker, hotter. They had tried to steal my name, my authority, my very identity. Not just disrespect, now fraud. Will there be consequences, I asked? Not unless you pursue charges, he replied. For now, the matter is closed quietly. The bank will mark the application fraudulent, but unless you request further action, it won't leave their files. I pressed my hand to my chest where my heart hammered. Quiet resolution. No police, no courtroom, no scandal. Just one more stone laid on the wall of evidence I was beginning to build. When I hung up, I sat at the table a long time staring at the sunlight spilling across the floor. The house looked unchanged, same curtains, same furniture, same hum of the refrigerator. Yet everything felt different. The people I had trusted most had turned my own name into a weapon against me. I opened my notebook, the one filled with red checks, and wrote a new entry at the bottom of the page. Signature identity authority mine. Then I drew a crimson line beneath it, hard enough to dent the paper. That evening, Mara breezed into the kitchen as though nothing had happened. "We're eating out tonight," she said lightly. "Don't wait up." I watched her adjust her earrings in the reflection of the microwave. She didn't know the loan had been blocked, didn't know her scheme had already collapsed in silence. And I didn't tell her. Let her think her paper daggers could cut. I had already seen them crumble. I washed the dishes slowly after she left the warm water running over my hands, and I thought, if they dare forge my name, what line won't they cross? It was nearly dusk when the knock rattled the front door. Not a neighborly tap, not Sophie forgetting her key, but a sharp, official rhythm that made the air in the hallway stiffen. Through the window, I saw the flash of blue lights bouncing off the driveway. 2 uniformed officers stood at the threshold. One tall with a clipped mustache spoke first. "Mrs. Hale." "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "We've received a complaint regarding possible elder abuse of property. We need to ask you a few questions." Behind me, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Mara's voice rose with false urgency. "Officers, thank you for coming. My mother is being manipulated. She's not capable of making sound decisions about the house anymore." I turned to look at her. Her face was arranged in an imitation of concern, lips pursed, brows drawn together, but her eyes betrayed the eagerness of someone who thought they had finally trapped their opponent. Evan appeared behind her, his arms crossed, silent but looming. "May we see documentation of ownership?" the mustached officer asked me. Without a word, I walked upstairs, retrieved the folder from my drawer, and came back down. The deed was crisp inside its protective sleeve, my name bold and unchallenged on every page. I laid it flat across the table. The second officer, a woman with keen eyes, studied it closely. She looked from the paper to me, then to Mara. "Everything here appears valid. Mrs. Hale, this is your sole property." "Yes," I said. "I bought it outright years ago. No liens, no joint owners." Mara stepped forward, her voice tightening. "She doesn't understand what she's signing. She's been confused, forgetful." "My husband and I." The female officer held up a hand. "We can't go on claims without evidence. Unless you have legal documents to prove otherwise, this house belongs solely to your mother." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hiss of the officers' radios. Evan shifted his weight, but said nothing. Mara's face flushed red, her lips pressed so tightly together they almost disappeared. I folded my arms, the edges of calm sharpening into resolve. For weeks, I had felt their power pressing down on me. Now, for the first time, their lies were stripped bare in front of witnesses who mattered. The mustached officer closed the folder and handed it back to me. "Ma'am, there's no basis for this complaint. We apologize for the disturbance." "Thank you," I said, my voice level. The two officers tipped their hats and left the blue lights fading down the street. The house fell into silence again, but it wasn't the silence of erasure. It was the silence of victory. Mara still stood frozen near the table, her fists clenched. "You think this is over?" she muttered, barely audible. I slipped the deed back into its folder. "No, Mara. I think this is just beginning." Her eyes flicked to mine, startled by the evenness in my tone. Evan looked at the floor, jaw tight, but said nothing. I walked past them, climbed the stairs with measured steps, and closed my bedroom door behind me. For the first time, their accusations hadn't shaken me. They had exposed themselves instead. What happens when their lies stop scaring me and start exposing them? The day after the police visit, I decided to give myself some air. I spent the morning at the library wandering between the stacks like I used to when I worked there. The quiet steadied me. I returned home mid-afternoon with a small bag of groceries, expecting the house to be as I left it. Instead, a moving truck was backed into the driveway, its rear door rolled open like a gaping mouth. Two men in work shirts carried my dining chairs down the front steps. I froze. For a moment, I thought I must be mistaken, but then I saw Mara on the porch, pointing and directing as though she were foreman of the operation. "What do you think you're doing?" My voice cracked across the yard before I even realized I'd shouted. The men hesitated, one of them shifting the chair awkwardly against his shoulder. Mara spun her expression souring. "Mom, please, don't make a scene. We're just helping you clear some space. You won't need all of this once you move out." I marched up the walkway, my hands trembling around the grocery bag. "That furniture is mine. You don't have permission to touch it." Mara rolled her eyes, lowering her voice, as though I were the unreasonable one. "It's just things, Mom. We'll store them for you. Don't get dramatic." I dropped the grocery bag on the porch with a thud, stepped in front of the movers, and planted myself squarely in the path of the truck. "Put it back inside. Now. If you take another step, I'll call the police." The men looked at one another. Neither seemed eager to test me. Slowly, they turned and carried the chair back into the house. Mara's face flushed crimson. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Mara." I said, my voice steady, despite the pounding in my chest. "I'm done being embarrassed. This house is mine, and everything inside that I bought is mine. If you or anyone else tries to move so much as a spoon without my consent, I will have officers here before you can blink." The movers stood uncertain, clearly waiting for instructions. Mara flailed her arms in frustration. "Go on, finish the job." They didn't move. One rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am, maybe we should step out of this. We weren't told it was complicated." "Smart choice," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket and holding it up where they could see the unlocked keypad. "Now take your truck and leave." The two men muttered apologies and began loading their straps and pads back into the vehicle. The truck rumbled to life and eased down the driveway, leaving the furniture on the lawn abandoned mid-move. Silence fell, except for the fading growl of the engine. Mara glared at me, fists curled at her sides. Evan appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. He didn't intervene, only muttered under his breath as the movers disappeared down the street. already took the important stuff he said. The words cut through me sharper than any shout. What did you just say? Evan shrugged his eyes, sliding away. Nothing. Forget it. But it wasn't nothing. The chill that spread through me told me it was everything. I looked at Mara, but she avoided my gaze. Lips pressed tight. I gathered the chairs, dragging them back inside, one by one, my body heavy, but my resolve stronger. The house felt different now, not because the furniture had moved, but because something else had shifted, something I couldn't yet name. As I closed the door and leaned against it, the echo of Evan's word pulsed in my mind, already took the important stuff. What have they stolen already? And can I prove it? Mr. Jimenez called the next morning, his tone brisk but warm. I've found a couple ready to purchase immediately. Cash. They'd like to meet you today. The speed of it startled me, though I had asked for haste. My mind raced with images of Mara's fury, Evans muttering the movers skulking away. Still, I steadied myself and agreed. By 3 o'clock, I sat in the living room, my notebook closed on my lap. The doorbell rang. Mr. Jimenez entered first his suit, neat as ever, followed by a young couple who looked barely in their 30s. The woman stepped forward with a smile. Mrs. Hale? Her voice carried a familiarity that tugged at me. Her dark hair was swept into a tidy bun, her eyes alive with energy. Yes, I answered cautiously. It's Leila. Leila Flores. From the community library. You helped me with my scholarship essays. The name landed, and suddenly I saw her again, 16 years old, hunched over a stack of books, chewing a pencil, as I guided her through drafts. She had been shy then, her voice soft, but her determination, bright. I pressed a hand to my chest. Leila Flores. Of course. You went on to, what was it? Northwestern. She laughed a little sheepishly. Yes. And then law school. I'm a partner in a small firm now. This is my husband, Daniel. Daniel reached out, shaking my hand firmly. His eyes conveyed pride in his wife more than in himself. Mr. Jimenez cleared his throat gently. They're offering full cash value. No delays, no financing. But I barely heard him. My gaze stayed on Leila. Memories washed over me of evenings in the library, showing her how to organize her notes, reminding her she was capable of more than she believed. You made it, I whispered. Her expression softened. Because you believed I could. This house? It feels like the right next step for us. We want a place to raise a family. A foundation. The words curled around me like an echo of my own past. I had bought this house for Mara, for her future, for her foundation. And now here stood Leila, who carried her gratitude like a torch, wanting to build something of her own within these walls. I felt the tightness in my chest ease. Selling to her wasn't just escape. It was continuity, a kind of legacy. Mara's voice flared in my memory. You should find another place. Evan's sneer. Already took the important stuff. They had turned this house into a battlefield. But with Leila and Daniel, I saw sunlight again, saw laughter filling the rooms, saw respect where entitlement had rotted. Mr. Jimenez placed the preliminary contract on the table. If you're comfortable, we can proceed to signatures by week's end. I looked at the paper, then at Leila. Her hands were clasped with Daniel's, her smile waiting, but not pressing. I nodded slowly. Yes, let's do it. As the couple began touring the house with Jimenez, I lingered in the entryway, my fingers brushing the banister. The house no longer felt like something slipping from my grasp. It felt like something I was deliberately placing in the hands of the next generation. When they left, promising to return for the signing, I stood at the door long after the car disappeared down the street. The house was still mine for now, but already I could feel it loosening its hold not as a loss, but as a release. Can passing the house on be both liberation and legacy? 2 days after meeting Lila and Daniel, I woke to the ring of my phone. Herrick's voice carried an edge I had not heard before. Lorraine. I received notice this morning. Your daughter filed documents claiming you're mentally unfit to manage your property. They attached what appears to be a psychiatric evaluation with your name on it. The blood drained from my face. That's impossible. I know. The signature on the physician's line doesn't match. But the problem is, the bank and the court still need verification. If we don't respond quickly, they could stall the sale. I sat up straighter in bed, anger replacing fear. They had forged my name before. Now they were trying to forge my very mind. I'll call Dr. Tejada, I said firmly. By mid-morning, I was in the familiar waiting room of Dr. Elias Tejada, my physician for more than a decade. The scent of antiseptic and lavender hand soap lingered in the air. When he opened the door, his brows lifted. Lorraine, you look well. What brings you in on such short notice? I handed him the copy Herrick had sent me, the fraudulent evaluation. They're claiming I'm incompetent. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the page. This isn't my handwriting, and this is not my signature. He looked up steady. Lorraine, you are one of my most lucid patients. If anyone's competent, it's you. I need proof, I said. My voice didn't shake. You'll have it. He ushered me into his office, asked a few routine questions, ran a brief memory test, checked my reflexes and vitals. By the end, he was already typing. A glowing certification printed on letterhead signed and stamped with his red seal, patient, demonstrates excellent cognitive health, fully capable of managing her affairs. When he handed it to me, I felt a surge of strength. This paper wasn't just a defense, it was a shield. Back at Herrick's office that afternoon, I placed the certification on his desk. Here, file it today. He scanned it quickly, nodding. This will do. And I'll file a fraud claim against Mara and Evan for submitting falsified medical documents. That crosses into criminal territory. The words criminal territory rang in my ears like a bell. For weeks I had been absorbing their insults, their schemes, their subtle humiliations. Now the tide was turning not only in my favor, but against them. Let them try again, I murmured. Every lie they tell only digs the hole deeper. Herrick looked at me with something close to admiration. You're handling this with remarkable composure. I smiled faintly. They think I'm fragile. They forget who built the ground they stand on. Leaving the office, I carried the envelope with me as though it were a torch. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured gold across the courthouse square. I paused on the steps, watching people pass lawyers in pressed suits, young parents tugging children along old men feeding pigeons. The world moved on, steady, unbothered. And so would I. When I reached home, Mara was at the kitchen counter scrolling her phone. She looked up, a trace of expectation in her eyes. I set my bag down. Carefully, met her gaze and let the silence linger until she looked away. They had called me incompetent. Yet here I stood, documents in hand, steadier than ever. When they call me unstable, how do I prove I'm the most stable of us all? It was mid-morning when the knock came, sharp, official, yet softer than the police knock had been. I opened the door to find a woman in a navy suit holding a clipboard and a leather satchel. Her badge gleamed against the lapel. Mrs. Hale, I'm Angela Ruiz from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report of possible financial exploitation. May I come in? I stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. My pulse beat steady, not frantic this time. I had learned something these past weeks. Their lies would keep coming, but panic only gave those lies power. Angela sat crossing one leg over the other and began pulling papers from her satchel. The report alleges that you were pressured into selling your home against your will, that you lack capacity to make informed financial decisions. My jaw tightened. Mara and Evan's fingerprints were all over this as surely as if they'd signed the complaint. I understand, I said evenly. Would you like to see the deed? She nodded. I retrieved the familiar folder from my desk, laying it open before her. She read carefully, then looked up. Your name is the sole owner. Yes, always has been. And the decision to sell mine, I said firmly. Entirely mine. I contacted a realtor of my own choosing. Here is the preliminary contract. I slid Mr. Jimenez's papers across the table. The ink was still crisp, my signature bold and deliberate. Angela examined them, flipping through each page. These look properly executed. No co-signers, no outside authorization. Correct. I've also been evaluated by my physician, Dr. Tejada. I handed her the certification he'd written only days before. No concerns about competency. This sale is not exploitation. It is liberation. Her eyes flicked up at that last word. Not mocking, curious. She studied me for a moment longer, then set the documents neatly back into the folder. Mrs. Hale, from what I see, there's no basis for this report. You've acted on your own behalf with full capacity and appropriate documentation. I will be closing the case as unfounded. Relief washed over me, not the trembling kind, but the kind that steadies your spine. Angela tucked her pen back into her satchel. Unfortunately, anyone can file a report. We're obligated to follow up, but repeated false claims can carry consequences for the reporter. If it happens again, I recommend you notify your attorney. I allowed myself a small smile. Believe me, I will. She rose, shook my hand, and left, with professional efficiency. I stood at the window watching her car pull away, the sunlight catching the windshield. Behind me, the living room was quiet, but it felt different now. Less like a battleground, more like reclaimed ground. When Mara came home later that evening, her eyes darted toward the door as if expecting a squad of officials trailing behind me. But nothing followed her in, only silence. I let her walk past without a word, because silence now was not submission. It was proof. How many false alarms before the truth rings louder than their lies? Herrick called me early, his voice tight, each word clipped like he was holding something back. Lorraine, we need to meet at the courthouse this afternoon. There's been interference. I didn't ask for details until I was sitting across from him in the small consultation room, the walls pale and bare. He slid a manila folder toward me, his jaw set. Your former attorney, Mr. Caro, filed a motion this morning to stall the sale of your house. He submitted it on behalf of your daughter, claiming to represent your interests. The room seemed to tilt. Caro. But I haven't spoken to him in years. He represented me when I bought the house, nothing more. Herrick's eyes hardened. I'm afraid he's been bribed, Lorraine. The documents use your name, but the request clearly benefits Mara and Evan. Caro knows better, yet he filed it anyway. A hot wave of anger rose in me. It wasn't enough that Mara had forged my signature fabricated psychiatric papers called in false reports. Now she had dug up someone I once trusted and turned him against me. I clenched my hands in my lap. So even allies can be bought. Herrick's voice cut through the storm inside me. I anticipated something like this. That's why Jimenez has already prepared a protective order. We're filing it today to shield the sale from outside interference. Once the judge signs no motion legitimate or not can delay the transfer. At that moment, Jimenez entered. His tie loosened his briefcase, snapping open with brisk confidence. "Lorraine," he greeted, his tone a balm. "I've spoken to the clerk. The judge is reviewing our petition this very hour. We'll keep this sale airtight." I looked between them. Herrick's quiet fury and Jimenez's calm determination, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. Still, the sting of betrayal lingered sharp. "They think I'll bend," I said, my voice low but firm. "They think I'll keep absorbing blow after blow because I always have. But no more. No more leniency." Herrick nodded slowly. "Good. Hold on to that resolve. It's what will carry you through." The hours that followed blurred in courthouse corridors. Papers handed over, signatures inked with deliberate strokes. A judge's seal pressed onto protective orders like a final stamp of authority. Each step was procedural, but to me, it felt like laying bricks on a wall between myself and the chaos Mara had unleashed. By late afternoon, it was done. Herrick closed his folder with a decisive snap. The protective order is in place. The sale is shielded. Caro's motion is dead before it breathes. Relief spread through me, not as release, but as armor. Every attempt they made only forced me to become sharper, clearer, less forgiving. As I walked out of the courthouse into the cooling air, I passed Caro in the hallway. He glanced at me, guilt flashing across his face before he looked away. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Once respected, now tarnished by a bribe. But then I remembered the weight of each betrayal I had borne, and pity turned to steel. I stepped past him without a word, my heels clicking steady against the marble floor. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the courthouse steps in amber light. The papers in my bag felt heavy, but in the best way, like proof, like victory close at hand. Still, as I drove home, one thought circled tight in my chest. When even allies can be bought, who do I truly trust? The house was no longer mine in spirit by the time Mara and Evan returned that evening. It had already begun to shift hands that afternoon when Jimenez finalized the transfer. His calm voice confirming the funds had cleared the contract, sealed the deed, officially signed away. I had stood in the office with pen in hand, steady and deliberate, knowing each stroke was not just the sale of property, but the reclaiming of dignity. By the time their car rolled into the driveway, strangers were already carrying boxes across the threshold. Daniel lifted one marked kitchen, while Lila directed movers with calm authority, her voice filling the air that used to be choked with tension. The front lawn. Once an image of stability now looked like a crossroads one, life moving out, another moving in. I stood on the porch, the folder of documents tucked under my arm, when Mara's door slammed and she strode toward me. Her eyes widened as she took in the unfamiliar faces carting boxes through the hallway. What is happening here? Evan came behind her, his voice sharp. Who are these people? Why are they in our house? I didn't flinch. I drew the contract from the folder and held it up, the embossed seal catching the light of the setting sun. They're not strangers. They're the new owners. The house was sold this afternoon. The deed is no longer in my name. Mara's face drained of color. You sold it. Without telling us. Without her words. Broke into stammers. Evan stepped closer, his jaw tight, his hands fisted at his sides. You had no right. I met his glare evenly. Every right. It was mine, always mine. Bought with my savings, my labor, my sacrifices. Not yours. Not hers. Lila appeared in the doorway, then smiling faintly at me before turning to Mara and Evan. We'll take good care of it. Don't worry. Her presence, polite yet firm, was another reminder that their reign over this house had ended. Mara spun toward me, her voice cracking. "You blindsided us. How could you do this?" To your own daughter, I steadied my breath, remembering every humiliation, every forged paper, every false report. This was never about leaving Mara. It was about respect. And you stopped showing it long ago. The movers continued past us, carrying boxes marked with fresh black ink. Daniel offered me a nod as he passed, quiet acknowledgement that he understood more than he said. Mara's tears sprang hot and sudden, though her anger was louder. We had plans. We built a life here. You built a life on my silence, I said, on the assumption that I would never stand up, never say no, never claim what was mine. But silence is not the same as surrender. And today it ended. Evan muttered something under his breath, too low to catch, too bitter to matter. His silence, his complicity had always been his weapon. Now it looked like defeat. Mara looked back toward the living room where Sophie's crayons still sat in a cup on the shelf. Her voice softened for a moment. What about Sophie? She loves this place. I felt the ache in my chest, but I didn't falter. She'll love wherever she's treated with kindness. Children remember love, not walls. The movers carried the last box through, and Jimenez approached, handing me the final copy of the contract. His nod was firm, professional, the seal on the moment. I turned toward the steps, my bag already packed in the car. The house behind me was no longer mine, but neither was the burden it had become. As I walked away, I heard Mara's voice rise behind me, desperate breaking. But I didn't turn back. If respect never returns, can love survive its absence? The first morning in my new apartment, I woke to the sound of water. The lake stretched just beyond my window, its surface brushed silver by dawn. No echo of slammed doors, no muttered complaints, no eyes watching me like I was an unwelcome guest. Just the steady hush of waves against the shore. The apartment was modest, 2 rooms, a small balcony, walls bare for now, but it breathed peace. I brewed coffee in my chipped white mug and carried it to the balcony. Geese glided in formation overhead, their wings cutting across the pale sky. I lifted the cup to my lips and thought, this is mine. All mine. Days soon found their rhythm. I walked the park trails each morning where joggers and dog walkers nodded hello. The trees had begun to turn their branches aflame with red and gold. My steps felt lighter without the weight of someone else's disapproval. Clara coaxed me into a ceramics class at the community center. I resisted, at first worried my hands would tremble too much to shape anything useful. But the moment the clay spun under my palms, I felt a calm concentration settle over me. The other women laughed when my first bowl collapsed into a lopsided lump, and I laughed with them. For once I wasn't invisible. I wasn't tolerated. I was simply part of something. Evenings, Clara would stop by with a bag of pastries or a bottle of red wine. We'd sit on my little balcony watching the lights ripple across the lake. We didn't talk about Mara and Evan much anymore. My anger had burned down to embers warm but not consuming. One afternoon, while helping Lila and Daniel settle paperwork with Jimenez, I discovered something unexpected. Lila mentioned it so casually, I almost missed it. We're setting aside part of the property, she said, sorting through a folder. We want the carriage house renovated into an office for the elder rights group we've been supporting. It feels right, you know, to honor where the home came from. I blinked at her, the words sinking in slowly. An elder rights group? Yes. Her smile softened. It'll be a space for free consultations, workshops, legal advice. People who need help won't have to fight alone. A warmth spread through me so sudden I had to grip the table. The house I'd once bought for my daughter, the house she had twisted into a weapon against me, would now become a refuge for others like me. My gift reclaimed and repurposed was finding a truer legacy than I had ever imagined. I touched Lila's hand lightly. That means more than I can say. Daniel gave a small nod. It's the least we can do. You gave Lila a chance years ago. We're just paying it forward. I left their office with tears stinging my eyes, but this time they weren't born of betrayal. They were gratitude, relief, pride. Out of ashes, something better had been built. That night in my apartment, I opened my desk drawer. Inside lay a single brass key. It no longer unlocked the house on Pinecrest Avenue, but I kept it anyway, not for utility, but for meaning. A reminder that entry to a home or to a heart is earned by respect, not demanded by entitlement. I closed the drawer, gently turned the lock, and rested my hand on the smooth wood. The key was safe, but more importantly, so was I. The lake outside shimmered under the moonlight, the quiet, steady, and true. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Can wisdom truly be inherited, or must each soul earn it in fire outline? Act 1. Betrayal. Sparks, resolve, care. 1 to 5. Act 2. Quiet strategy, rising fire. Kiars. 6 door, 12. Act 3. The house is hers. The future 2. 13 to 17.